Welcome to the Saturday session, Online News Association Conference. This is a session called From Journalist to Entrepreneur. Pleased to see almost a full room here talking about a topic that a few years ago might have been considered somewhat sacrilegious among a gathering of journalists. But thankfully today, at least at the ONA, a freely open debated topic and very much a topic of interest. One item of note, if you are on Twitter today, we're going to be using the hashtag ONABiz. So that'll help people sort of organize the tweets from this conference, this session. And then towards the end, I'll be looking at this for questions from the audience and from those people who are not in the room who might have questions, who maybe have been following along with your tweets. So we're here to talk about entrepreneurialism. And so I thought we'd start with this quote from Jeff Hausenbold, who's the CEO of Shutterfly. He says that entrepreneurialism is a state of mind. It's how do you create things that people haven't envisioned before? How do you aggregate the resources, motivate people, and execute against that vision? It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go and start your own business. The state of mind of entrepreneurship can happen in the largest corporations or the smallest companies. Entrepreneurship is really about creating new products, new markets, new ideas, and new businesses to capture some of the economic benefit from the vision and hard work. And so that's kind of the frame that we're going to start with today. And the essential questions we're here to answer are: what is it like to go from a journalist to being an entrepreneur? What does it take to go from being a journalist to an entrepreneur? And what area looks the most promising for a journalist who is interested in becoming an entrepreneur? And to help us answer these questions, we have an awesome panel. Anne Grimes is a professor of journalism and the acting director of the graduate program of journalism at Stanford University. She teaches classes in public issues reporting, business, technology, and digital media, and is a former business and technology reporter for the Wall Street Journal, among other things. Scott Lewis is a former newspaper reporter who is now CEO of voiceofsandiego.org, a fairly new independent journalism startup now in its fourth year. And Om Malik is founder of Giga Om Networks. He was part of the founding team at Forbes.com and a reporter at Business 2.0 magazine. Now he's one of the most widely read technology journalists in the world and has also spent time in the venture capital world, so he should have plenty of good stuff to tell us as well. My name is Mark Briggs. I am the CEO of a company called Sarah Media in Seattle. I spent the previous 10 years running online newspapers, online websites for newspapers, and a year ago left that job to start this company. We're providing software as a service and also doing some consulting for big media companies, small independent journalism startups, and also working with a handful of universities as well. I also wrote a book in 2007 called Journalism 2.0, and next month an updated and expanded college textbook version of that called Journalism Next will be due out. So I know firsthand what it's like to go from being a journalist to an entrepreneur. I obviously have a lot of questions for this panel, and hopefully towards the end we'll get some time for everyone else to weigh in as well. So I'm going to ask each of them to start by giving us a little bit of their background, and then we'll get into some more specific questions. Anne?
Good morning. Thank you all for coming. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. So I come to this panel wearing, I guess, three hats. First, as a journalist, obviously. For many years, I covered entrepreneurship, Silicon Valley, venture capital here on the West Coast for the Wall Street Journal. So I know a lot about the topic from my work as a reporter. I also, while I was at Dow Jones, worked, I would say, as an entrepreneur within the larger organization. For a period of time, I worked with business development and editorial teams to help with a digital media strategy as Dow Jones tried to look for new revenue streams and peel off different subject areas and see if we could monetize them in different ways, which we did through a series of niche publications in venture capital, private equity, healthcare, clean tech, etc. And then thirdly, and most recently, I have an educator's hat. 4 years ago, I was invited to come and teach at Stanford, and part of my mandate there was to help reinvigorate the curriculum. And those of you who are educators in the room know this is an ongoing process, especially when it comes to technology and business. And so we started a new curriculum as part of our program in digital media and entrepreneurship. And what we do every spring, I teach a class in this area. It's the capstone class to our program. We batch the students together, the journalism students together with business students, MBAs, and students who are computer science students and technology and engineering students, have them work on teams and come up with and develop new tools, new prototypes, and it's been a lot of fun. So I'd say that we're pretty excited about this sort of nexus of technology and journalism and entrepreneurship. I'd say that if you're what we're seeing with our 20-somethings is that a lot of them want to start startups, so it's a good time. There's lots of opportunity. They're very excited. Our enrollment numbers are up, and from where I sit these days, it seems like there's a tremendous amount of activity going on. It's lots of seedlings, small ventures are starting, and new, larger ones as well, in addition to our pros here next to me. Everything from what's happening in Texas to what's happening here in San Francisco with Warren Hellman's new venture.
Excellent. And I agree. I'm so jealous of that group of individuals out there running co-press. These kids, you know, some of them maybe not even graduated from college. They already have formed their own company, and they're just going after it. And I thought, when I got out of college, you know, you just didn't think like that. You were, where's the job going to be? Where's the paycheck? And nowadays, there's much more of an entrepreneurial spirit, and I think it's great to see. Scott, can you give us a little bit of background from Voice of San Diego?
Sure. There's a lot of people in the audience that I look to for guidance, so it's an honor to be here. Thanks. I started at Voice of San Diego as a writer in 2005, and shortly after I started, there was kind of a crisis in leadership. The organization itself, I think, was threatened. It was just a kind of a bad time, and a friend and I put together a proposal for the board of directors about how we could take it over and sort of clean up some of the things on the side and reduce some of the costs and maybe try to turn it into something special. And we worked really hard. They accepted it, and for a while there I became a co-editor, and I started to absorb more and more of the operations organizational issues, and learned a lot about a website and about just the nuts and bolts of keeping an organization going, things that I had always taken for granted. I realized how hard a lot of things really are, even little things. Keeping phones in your office, for example, and business cards, that kind of thing, is a lot easier said than done. But we did well, and our journalists have made a significant impact in San Diego. And over time, I absorbed so many operational responsibilities that it got to the point where we kept hoping that a magic businessman would show up someday and be the one that would take care of all the business responsibilities, so that I and my editorial partner could just keep writing all the great things that we were writing. But that magic person turned out to be little old me, and so I took over the role as CEO and operations, and the burden really fell on me to ensure that we continued to diversify our revenue and reach that elusive goal of sustainability. And so I go to bed at night with the jobs of now 13 people on my mind, and wake up with it on my mind, and sometimes don't sleep with it on my mind, just because I know that I've had to learn a lot of tough lessons. I've had to learn how to fire people and cut costs. I've had to learn how to deal with ethical issues and crises with legal issues. But I can do a lot of that stuff, and I can make tough decisions one of the things I never want to have to do is lay anybody off, because that would seem like a failure on my part. And we are hitting our projections. We're above it, and diversifying our revenue and continuing to have a major impact, I think, in San Diego. And I learned that actually working on the business side and making things happen and providing the fuel for this engine of these passionate people that work there, and enabling them to do more and more work and have more and more of an impact is as much of a thrill as anything I did journalistically. And at first that was hard to imagine, and now it's very easy to enjoy. So if I can provide any perspective today on what that was like, or what I think is going to happen, I'd be honored.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, a lot of people ask me, what's it like running a startup? I say, well, if you've ever had kids, you know what it's like. When that first year that you have a baby and you wonder if it's still breathing when it's sleeping, and is it still alive? And some days it's so cute, and other days it just cries all day, but you love it and you want to see it grow up, right? Well, we've got someone with us today who has seen one grow up, or many grow up. Om, tell us your story.
Thanks, Mark. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm almost 25 years in the business, about 15 in this country and 10 in my native country of India. GigaOM just started, it just happened. I didn't plan to start it as a company. It started out as a blog in 2001, mostly as an expression of my frustration of working at a monthly magazine. Being a lifetime daily reporter, I had a tough time dealing with 3 months when the story would actually get to press. So I started writing it, and eventually it gained enough critical mass where it was getting more attention than my work at first at Red Herring and then at Business 2.0. So in 2005, it was becoming increasingly obvious that most of the stories we business reporters write about of middle management issues and inefficient corporate structures were the ones which were plaguing most media companies, and I was living it on a daily basis. And I said, well, this is not a way to define my future, where some faceless person in New York is going to decide whether I'll have food on my table tomorrow or not. And here I had an asset which was not only growing by the day, and it was attracting a lot of attention and a lot of advertising interest. But still, there is nothing more comfortable than the cocoon of a big, Time Inc. for, a nice 6-figure salary goes a long way. I still remember my mother calling me up and just like, why are you even thinking about leaving this job? This is the greatest thing that happened to you. And I said, well, maybe in the short term, it is the greatest thing that happened to me. So in May 2006, after talking to a bunch of VCs, having covered Silicon Valley long enough, I know enough of them, I ran the idea by a few of them, and one of them actually gave me a check and said, okay, time to go to work. You don't need any other publication to help you out, and what's going to happen? So on June 25th, 2006, we turned GigaOM from my personal, blog into a company. And since then, we've grown to 21 people. We have a network of 7 blogs now. We started 4 and we've acquired 3. We have, 4 conferences, and we had 4 conferences in 2009. We will have maybe 6 in 2010. We just launched our research business. Just to kind of fact check stuff in here, I'm just the founder now. I'm not the CEO. Actually, I have not been the CEO for almost a year now, and I'm not the editor of the publication as well. I just write, and that's my job. That's it. And I don't even cover news. I just write more analytical pieces. What are the 3 years on? What have I learned? It looks much easier from the outside than it really is. Good news was that being an immigrant, you kind of know failure is not an option. So you kind of go on 2 hours of sleep anyway, and till your body gives out, which happened to me. And that was another testament that the traditional journalist lifestyle probably not going to work. So you have to stop drinking scotch and smoking and eating red meat before you start a company. You have to go to the gym and you have to be in shape. Otherwise, the forces conspire against you. It is much tougher than people realize. I think there is a myth in Silicon Valley and in the popular media about the startup CEO or startup founder. We have turned them into rock stars, we've turned them into heroes, but really it's dad on a bad day. That's the description I have. Now I can empathize with my father, just what he was going through on any single day. But when the rewards come in, it is a fascinating, fantastic feeling. I mean, just to have one of your writers break a story, or your site get national recognition or whatever it is a pretty proud moment. But as a startup, there is 99% of the time you're going to have bad days, but there's one day which is going to be awesome. So you work towards that. I know. For me, that's the motivation, and so here we are.
Wow, that's great. Great story. So what I'm going to do now is just take a couple of minutes and give us a bit of a tour, some examples of entrepreneurial journalism that are out there in the world and working right now. And this is just kind of to frame the discussion, and then we'll get into some questions. ProPublica, most of you have probably heard about, millions in funding, doing investigative journalism. Anyone here from ProPublica? How many people? Several of you. Okay, good. Artsjournal.com. Anyone here from Artsjournal.com? Did Doug come? No. Doug McClellan started the site more than 10 years ago, and former arts reporter, arts and culture reporter. And so this site has been profitable for a long time. Is one of the original sort of aggregator sites of different kinds of journalism, mostly cultural reviews and arts coverage. Xconomy. Anyone here from Xconomy? No? They should be at this conference. They're in San Diego, Boston, and Seattle. They cover mostly biotech and other high technology kind of coverage. Venture capital backed. I've hired a lot of former newspaper reporters and are paying really well, actually, as I know a couple of people who work there in Seattle. Pegasus News. Mike Oren started this hyperlocal site in Dallas in 2005. It's actually been sold twice, so he has 2 acquisitions under his belt, which is kind of interesting. I don't think he ever predicted that would happen in such a short time. Site is continuing to grow, setting new records for traffic and revenue, even during this recession economic downturn. Spot Us. Is David here? He's in another session. You've seen David Cohn around. He started Spot Us in the Bay Area, kind of crowd-funded journalism. He's now branching out into Los Angeles, and last night I was trying to convince him to come to Seattle as well. It's a great model. Publish 2. Who's here from Publish 2? Okay, several of you. Scott Karp started this company, which is a sign of it's kind of the market that my company, Sarah Media, is in as well. So it's more, journalists can do more than just provide coverage and content. They can actually provide technology to help journalists provide coverage and content. And so you see a lot of these companies popping up, and other interesting technologies from like Cover It Live to Caspio that a lot of news sites are using to do better journalism with their on the web. So that's just a quick overview of some examples of entrepreneurial journalism. So my first question for the panel is, how do you think this wave of entrepreneurial journalism will affect the overall ecosystem? And specifically, what do the big media companies think about all this, or are they thinking about it at all? And what have you seen? How does this affect the big media companies, if it does?
Well, one of the things we're seeing is that these sites are popping up and being formed, some of them by folks who have left legacy media companies. Kaiser Health News is a good example of, okay, great, where you see journalists from the Washington Post and Wall Street Journal who have built a very competitive health news service that one could argue provides not only competitive but better, more thorough coverage than the general interest publication can provide. So I'm not privy to these conversations, but one could argue that would it be more cost effective for a publication like the Washington Post to scale back its own health coverage, its own weekly, for a long time they've had a weekly health tab, and take some of its stories from Kaiser Health News. I think they have maybe done some of that. Similarly with ProPublica, we are seeing some of those stories coming into the mainstream press. So there's a lot more collaboration that's starting to happen because these sites are providing equal or better, more competitive coverage.
Okay.
So I think there'll be a move towards some more collaboration.
Okay. You probably have a good take on how your area has been affected.
So we've been syndicating with CNN Money, New York Times, Business Week, and Salon. And I think the biggest asset the big companies have, which is big media companies have, which is under-leveraged, is their traffic. There are two things a media company has at this moment, which is their two key competitive advantages. One is the traffic or the attention to their portal and their sales force, and that's it. Because, I don't see any difference in my journalists, my staff versus any other staff. And in fact, I would argue that some of these focused verticals are more, more in tune with the actual reality of the industry they cover. For instance, us or TechCrunch or paid content. We are more in tune with the people we write about, what they're doing more closely. But let's say a New York Times or a Washington Post can really provide the impetus of traffic. And so I think the bigger approach, if I am running Washington Post, which I'm not, hopefully, or the New York Times, I would take a more mutual fund type approach where you invest in a basket of media properties, which are almost like stocks, and you say you don't know which one is going to be hot when, because I think trying to pick winners in the next 5 to 6 years or 10 years in the media landscape is going to be pretty hard. I mean, Clay Shirky wrote that awesome essay, and he's pretty much right. We don't even know what's going to stick, right? I mean, just even the guys who are inventing the internet technologies of the future, even they don't know what the traffic patterns are going to look like, how the media consumption is going to look like going forward. I mean, you ask the guys from Twitter, even they can't predict what's going to happen 3 months from now. So in that environment, you kind of go with a more balanced portfolio approach and kind of, I love Politico. I probably never cared about politics, but thanks to them, I do now. It's not my thing, but it just is a bunch of, really great hacks, hacking at it. That's how I see it. There's no difference than great reporters and great programmers, right? The great programmers create great programs, and great reporters bring great stories to the market. That's what they do. And I think that's what is going to happen in the future. And I think it's somewhere in there is a nice business model for the big media companies. That they have to figure out what it is. Up until then, we're going to try and bring them down. So.
Right. Very good. Scott?
Sure. I can only talk about San Diego in that sense.
That's fine.
I always try to talk about what I might actually know something about. There was a speech the other day that's been talked about a lot that John Temple, the former editor of the Rocky Mountain News, gave. And there was a point in that has stuck in my head quite well, and it was he had a lesson learned, and one of them was that you should know your competition, and that sounds like a pretty obvious point, but I think there's massive confusion right now in the idea of what is competition and who our competitors out there are. In San Diego, for example, I'm asked continuously about a little cluster of folks that have come up there in different capacities. For instance, last year at this time, it was unheard of for. I would have been shocked if I would have known the level of acceptance that a nonprofit online entity has enjoyed in the last few months, as far as the idea being something that people think would actually work. Because last year at this time, it was a much different situation, and you know, people thought of it as a very exotic experiment, something that you know, I don't think a lot of people had a lot of faith would be able to be replicated or tried even in other places. And yet now you see in Texas and San Francisco and all across the country, we're getting a call a day from people, more, sometimes 2 or 3 a day. I'm turning into somewhat of a snob now when they call. I have trouble even dealing with the volume of calls from people looking for guidance on starting something like this in another place. And I think in San Diego this is the case too. There's a spin-off of the Union Tribune coming to San Diego State as an investigative news outlet, nonprofit, that will provide investigative reports to the Union Tribune and others. And, you know, had somebody told me 18 months ago that this was even possible or that they would even consider something like this, I would have just laughed all night, because the people there had always been so dismissive of us and of this type of model. To think that they would embrace it like this is really telling. So a type of cluster has come up in San Diego, and I'm very proud of that. I think that that's not something that is just a coincidence. You know, we've inspired, I think, people to think that they can do their own type of entity like this. A for-profit online site in San Diego, the San Diego News Network has started. And a lot of people see these things, this Union Tribune thing and this for-profit entity, and then the UT and others as our competitors, and ask me how I'm dealing with them. And I have to really think about who my competition is a lot more clearly than that. Just because they're a website doing news, does that mean they're my competition? Well, they're only focused on banner advertisements and as their revenue source. And my revenue source, I have 5 revenue sources: big donors, small donors, grants and foundations, corporate sponsors and advertisers, and then we're trying to develop syndication. And so I look at what part of that is competing with this new entity or other new entities, and I think I have to look through that lens all the time and remind myself that, you know, there are certain things you have to keep in mind. You know, I'm not pursuing page views. I'm not pursuing just banner advertisements and just trying to make my site attractive for that. I'm pursuing an engagement with San Diego. I want the community to know that we are a service and to feel like we're a service so that they support us, and that we can exchange this public service to them for their financial support in various capacities, as corporations, as sponsors, or as major donors. So I think there's a major confusion right now about what competition is. You have these newspapers that they've always been divided by their editorial and their business side, and their editorial side thinks of us as competitors, as well they should in certain cases. But as a business, are we competitive with the Union Tribune? They don't ask for donations or member programs. They're not trying to set up a sophisticated member program. They don't do sponsors in the same way. They don't apply for grants. Now, this new nonprofit entity might somehow compete with us for grants, but as a nonprofit, you also have to analyze that and realize that you both just have to prove your value and add value where you can. So I think there's a lot of confusion in that. I also think the traditional papers and others are reacting very strangely to what's happening. I mean, the Union Tribune in San Diego is on a marketing campaign announcing that it has 1.15 million readers in San Diego, and really trying to illustrate its power and its ubiquity. But is ubiquity really what we want now? I don't necessarily think that proving that you are ubiquitous is what you should try to do now. I think you should prove that you're valuable and that that you add value. If you're trying to maintain the aura and the truth that you are everything to everyone, I think you're going to see the trajectory of where we're going hurt that and make that just a less valuable proposition. And I think that we're all just very confused about what competition is now. Who my competition is something that I have to take very seriously and think about over and over again. And until somebody arises that's trying to create the same 5 revenue sources that I am and take them away from me, then I just got to keep going. I just got to keep doing what I think will provide that diversity of revenue that will keep us and my passionate staff nourished.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Good information. You mentioned the San Diego News Network, which is a new venture capital project in San Diego. This is very different than nonprofit funding because venture capitalists expect to make their money back. So they see tremendous business opportunity here, as well as becoming a sort of a community value. Maybe we can get Ann and Ohm, since they're kind of connected into the venture capital world here in Silicon Valley, to talk about how you've seen that change. Because I don't think that 2 or 3 years ago you could have got a VC very excited about funding a local news operation, especially. But now it seems to be almost sexy. Agree?
Would you like to go first?
No.
Well, I don't know if I would use that descriptor, but there is a lot of activity in this space, and I think that's drawing a lot of headlines. And so recently, in Texas, we've seen Austin Ventures has stepped up to the plate, John Thornton, to back the Texas Monthly there to the tune of, I think, $5 million, if I'm remembering correctly. Now they hope to make that sustainable. They hope to get a return on their investment. $5 million isn't a whole lot. Similarly here and on a bigger scale, we've heard about Warren Hellman backing a new venture for Bay Area news, which sounds very interesting. There have been a variety of proposals floated in this area, and the one that Hellman is funding is going to be a collaboration between the University of Berkeley Journalism School, KQED, and potentially the New York Times. So it'll be interesting to see how they staff that, how it gets off the ground, how they structure it with a nonprofit entity in there with Berkeley. And their hope, obviously, is to get a big return on their investment and to turn it from a nonprofit into a money-making operation.
Oh?
Well, since I raised venture capital, I have a thing or two I can tell you about that. They do want the money back, and a lot of it. So the part of the process is you really have to treat it, I think there is a lot of, we are very religious about the whole media aspect of the business here, but it really is a business. And on the web, because of the metrics and things which you can do and measure and quantify and analyze, it is really a business. It's no different than, let's say, selling a web service like a Salesforce.com. It is really a business. And as long as you can prove that there is a business you can make out of this whole, whatever you're doing, the venture capital is going to flow your way. We have 3 product lines now, 3 revenue streams. I'm thinking of 2 more right now. And yeah, I get up in the middle of the night trying to figure out what to do. But the trick in all this is just not thinking like a classic journalist, but thinking like a business person. And you have to bring in, I have my entire team. I basically have made my problems other people's problem in my company by bringing in a CEO who has a financial services background, right? He knows how financial, he used to run a CRM service for investment banks back in '97, long before there was a thing called SaaS or on-demand software. So he knows how to structure that business. we have a product, VP of product. We have VP of sales. We have people who are running it like just another startup, which is building its business. There is, the editorial is completely isolated, but because we are on the web, we have to treat and measure everything and just have to be. We have our own internal CRM system in the office where we basically measure how much money we are spending, how much we are getting back, what we need to do. It is really, you have to do it. Otherwise, you won't survive. I think one of the big shifts which gets lost in the religious debate about journalism and news is that this is actually a technology problem. This is the business breakdown of news, the traditional media, is an actual technology problem. Just like Moore's Law showed up in the offices of, DEC and IBM back in the 80s, and just like, the Japanese showed up in, Detroit with their technology in the late 80s, the same thing is happening. The internet has showed up in the newsroom because it's a technology problem. Everybody is a reporter. Let's not delude ourselves. We are not, going to win this one. This is a battle for attention. This is a business of attention. People were saying that we are going to, it doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter how people, find information is very different. How they consume information is very different. I think a lot of people don't even care where the information comes from, who the brand is, from where it's coming from. So what you're really seeing is the breakdown of the information into information chunks. It's the atomization of information, of news, right? And now you saw with the Hudson River landing of the plane, the Mumbai attacks, or the Iran revolution, the Twitter was actually just a symptom of what is actually at play at large, which is that the news is getting atomized by the day. And in that kind of an environment, you need to figure out how are you going to get attention from the people who you think are your customers, right? Very hard for journalists to come to terms with the idea that your readers are your customers. I live to serve my readers. We have to make that our mantra. If we don't, we should be doing something else. PR is a very good profession. You can go do that. But if you're going to be a journalist, always have to remember who you're serving. And you cannot forget that every single thing you do has to be measured, quantified against a P&L. Like, it is a really hard mindset change. It took me about 1.5 years to get around that. But the VCs actually help you do that. If you convince them to give you the money, they actually help you get to that point, because it's a business, right? Like, so that's how you have to think. So there's a lot of people who want to start companies, just kind of have to start thinking in those terms.
Okay. Just a quick. Can I just ask, I'm going to just ask a follow-up for Om. Can you give us a sense that you said 3 revenue channels? Can you tell us what those are and how far away from profitability you are?
So we bob between profitability and unprofitability.
Bob.
Yeah, because it's just like some, summer months are not very profitable. Traditional media, we have the same problem. So, I guess January won't be very profitable. Okay. But there are months which are very profitable, just like regular media cycle. We have 3 product lines. We have advertising, which is mostly sponsorship driven, very little CPM. We have a research business, which is a subscription business, which is growing pretty actively. And we have events, so by end of 2009, we hope that it'll be 1/3 from each of these revenue streams. So we basically decreasing our reliance on advertising. Okay. So that was actually part of the business plan from day one. It's not something new.
Interesting. So. Okay. Scott, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, just a quick point. Nothing has been made more clear to me in my time in this position than how much money is actually available if we wanted to somehow go for profit. And this is an investment, not necessarily in actual revenue, which is much different. I've never been able to picture how that could actually turn into something that we could make money on. Or give the money back to the venture capitalists that were interested in that, and we're focused on this mission, and it comes down to the basic decision that we made that in order to sustain this mission, we need as many different revenue sources as possible, and that the nonprofit model offers more revenue sources. And we can, the only difference, we have to react to a market, we have to create a need and fill it and prove it and continue to provide a service, and in exchange we get support of all kinds. And so we feel like it's a total market relationship. It's just that the return on the investment gets reinvested in the mission, and that's our focus on that. And so I think there's when Chi-Town Daily News went down this last couple weeks ago, there was a lot of concern about, well, does this portend difficulty for the nonprofit sphere? But I think more than anything, it showed how much money is still out there for a for-profit entity to at least start with, and he saw that in Chicago, and if you're in a situation where you don't seem to think how it's going to work out, and you have somebody saying, well, I can help you with $5 or $10 million or something to start, then it's pretty attractive. So I think that there's an interesting thing going on right now about how much money is available. Everybody sees an opportunity. I don't think anybody sees exactly how it pays off yet. So,
Excellent. Okay, then I'm going to ask them one more question, and then I'm going to get to questions from audience. So I'm checking the back channel here on Twitter, so if you have questions, go ahead and type them in there. One of the things that's interesting, and what I want to get each of them to weigh in on, is what advice you would give to someone who wants to go from being a journalist to an entrepreneur. I often tell people that it's actually, there's a few things that help you from going from a journalist to entrepreneur. One of them is that if you're going to bootstrap your company, and you know what it's like to work for peanuts and to follow your passion, right? So you're not used to the big lavish salary. Sorry, I didn't have a six-figure salary home. So there's that. You have that advantage to
now
working for
why
cheap.
the timing is going down. So
Exactly.
Pay chumps like me 6 figures. So
So there's that. So I want to ask each of you, and maybe we can start with you, Anne, since you're dealing with students who maybe are considering this immediately, starting their own ventures. What advice do you give them to try to go from being a journalist to an entrepreneur?
Don't fall in love with your idea. A lot of these ventures get started out of passion, but your passion may not be shared by someone else. So one of the toughest things that we've seen with our students, and I think with journalists who've tried to move from reporting to the business side, is they think they know the answer. One of the things we get our students to do is to fail early and often. Take that idea, test it out, get feedback, come up with a new prototype, go back out, get more feedback, iterate all over again, get more feedback, and then refine your idea according to what your users or your customers are telling you, because what you think is a great idea just may not be shared.
Okay. Oh?
I just have one thing. Don't just sit here, just do it. I mean, it's not going to happen if you just keep thinking about it. So most of the people just talk about it, never get to it. That's one small advice.
Okay. So the Nike approach.
Yeah.
Just do it. Go ahead.
Well, that's quite an example of brevity. I have 5 things. I learned that vision isn't seeing exactly what will happen. It's seeing what needs to happen to prepare for it. And I think that's actually a big deal, because, as you say, just do it. There's so many people that want to write out exactly how it's all going to go over the first year, and they think that's what a business plan is, and if it skews, they think they've failed or something, and you have to be ready to be just completely shocked by what it turned out to be and how it feels. I would also more specifically say, not if you're a journalist, don't invest in technology. You're not a technologist. You're not a software coder. Maybe you are, but if you're a journalist, you're you probably don't necessarily come from that angle, and so you should let those people deal with that problem. And I think we're going to get to a situation where the distributors and technologists really deal with it well in a way that the producers of content then can access it either for free or for very inexpensive rates to publish and distribute their content. And I wouldn't invest in technology. I would understand that mistakes are good, and that being smart, like she said, is also knowing that you may have screwed up, and that you may not know everything, and being able to do difficult things like change direction or fire people, or having to make tough decisions that make you look like you made a bad decision before are things that you just have to deal with. Refer to your mission statement. I've had several. We were lucky. This is one of those ideas about vision. Our founders didn't know exactly what we would turn out to be, and had no clue actually. But they did have the acumen and vision to do a great mission statement. It's to deliver groundbreaking investigative news. But the second part is to enable and provide the information that residents need to make better decisions and provide for the social progress and social justice of good government and social justice. I didn't say it obviously very well, but the point is that it was ambitious and it was clear. And so every time I evaluate a partnership or a revenue deal or an issue, I literally do go back and read the mission statement now to see if it conforms to that, because as a nonprofit, that's the goal, is that mission, not to deliver shareholder value. And does it help to sustain that mission, or does it distract us? And I found that incredibly valuable. And then I think that's it. So. It all comes back to knowing that to being smart enough to know that you're not that smart.
Excellent.
Let me just add one other thing. Temperamentally, journalists are very risk averse, and so one of the funniest things that we see with our students is when we pair them together with the technology students, especially. The engineers are just like, throw the spaghetti on the wall. Let's just do it. Let's just, as you said, just do it. Let's iterate. And the journalists are like, wait, it's not good enough yet. So it just has to be good enough, to get the first version out there. And temperamentally, people are really resistant to that.
I think that's a great point. That journalists have always been in this situation where they put perspective on why somebody screwed up, or they've always written about how they should have done things better and whatnot, and inherent in that is the idea that they should have planned and seen everything and researched as much. But I've really come face to face with the idea that now it's journalists' turn to step up and show that they could have done it better. This is our chance, and I really take that to heart.
Okay. All right, we're going to go to questions now. Go ahead.
Hi, Rochelle Canigal from San Francisco State University. We need to talk later, Mark, by the way. We're on a panel together at the end of this month. But anyway, I wanted to get a sense. I can see how for someone who's 23 years old, they can afford to take the leap and become an entrepreneur. But what about someone who, even if they're not making a 6-figure salary, is making a 5-figure salary and has a mortgage or kids or responsibilities? How do the grown-ups among us then go and become entrepreneurs? So if you can get into sort of the nuts and bolts of what do you do in that first year or two to actually make a living?
Well, this might be shocking, but I'm actually older than 23, and consider myself a bit of a grown-up, although maybe earlier this week you might have challenged that notion. I'm going to answer that a little bit just because that's been my life for the past year. And so, it's a combination of things. First of all, you got to convince your wife that this is a good idea. That's challenge number one. And if she has a full-time job, that's a pretty good place to start. You've got benefits for the kids, and then you take a flying leap, and you have a lot of faith, and you do a lot of things in advance, though. So before I left my job, we had built a working prototype. We had taken it to a conference. We had showed it to potential customers. We had a lot of proof that we were onto something good before I ever turned in my resignation. And I think that, going about it smartly that way, so it's not about quitting your job and then going, wonder what I'm going to do now. It's really about being methodical about it, an approach and a plan, and figuring it out. So anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, I wasn't 23, I was 40 when I left, and it was a very convenient job for me, but I left. But the option was either do that or just wait for the axe to fall. Well, the Business 2.0 shut down about 17 months later. Well, why wait? Like, why let somebody else decide your destiny? When if you're going to fail or you're going to be out of job, well, try and be, live dangerously. What's the downside?
Nice.
I mean, what's the downside you have, right? Like, okay, I have an advantage. I didn't have a family, but I didn't have that safety net either, that I could fall back on a wife with a job or a house which is paid for. But you have to do it, right? Like, otherwise, it'll always be the case of coulda, shoulda, woulda. You could just keep sitting there and waiting for this industry to just collapse right in front of you. So I think my view is that if you're just smart about things, you've saved enough money, and if you really are passionate about something, it is worth giving it a shot. I personally think that is the only option for all people in our profession. You have to take a chance, because you know what? You might be the one with the silver bullet. None of us know if we have it, but you might be the one or somebody else. You have to try it. Like, just, that's the key question. How do you plan for it? Okay, maybe salt away 6 months of, living expenses, rent and food and, that kind of stuff, which you can do over a period of time. But it all involves planning. You also need to plan where you're going, right? Like, you need to know why you're doing this. What is the actual end goal, right? You need to have, it's not how, what the process is, but it's still knowing what is the objective. So once you have those two things figured out, it kind of gets easier. The first month is really rough, because you don't know. It's almost like driving blind. You don't know what's going to happen. But after that, you get a feel for it, and you kind of come out of it, and you go. I mean, it just happens, and then you get caught up in the thrill which is involved in it. Sometimes we get caught up, in the success aspect of a startup. We forget that it is, how far we get from the starting point that matters. I don't know why I'm quoting sneaker commercials today, but but it is the thing you need to really keep in mind is that you really have to start somewhere and see where you go. And you're a great journalist. You can write. You can always find a writing gig. That's how I feel. That's what I thought. That's what I convinced myself. Okay, worst case scenario, I'll still get a job somewhere. I started out writing community news for some paper in New Jersey. I mean, how bad can it get for me? Right?
Next question.
My name's Matilde Piard. I'm from the Palm Beach Post in Florida. I have a question, but I just really want to quickly say I'm not sure which 20-something-year-olds that are flush with money, because I think they might not have mortgage, but they have student debt. They might have trouble finding their first job, and they don't have a savings account with a lot of money. So anyway, my question is, it was very interesting to hear about the program at Stanford where journalism students are teamed up with computer science students and MBA students. For people who don't have the chance to be in such a program, what advice do you have specifically in terms of, I feel like my biggest hurdle is my fear that I don't have the tech skills, I don't have the business skills. I am a web producer, but I'm not a developer. I don't know how to actually develop things, and I've never written, a business plan. So what advice do you have for people like that? I'm tempted to sign up for evening classes, but at the same time, if I have a full-time job and I sign up for evening classes, when am I going to have time to then work on the startup?
Yeah, I'm going to, just for a second, I'm going to take what Om suggested and say that that's how you do it. You just do it. You don't. In my case, it wasn't about going back to MBA school and learning a bunch about business. It was about starting a business and figuring it out as you go. And you have margins of time, and that's when you do it. So there's a lot of 5 a.m. and 10 p.m. when you're working your full-time job and you're building something on the side. But side projects are great things, and many wonderful companies have started off of side projects. And so if you treat it that way, then you have that stability to see which direction it can go, and if it can take off while you still have the stability of a full-time job. Yeah?
Let me just add that one of the reasons we started this class is because, at least my own experience at Dow Jones was, and I'm sure that my colleagues have shared this experience, the tech people, the business people, and the journalists don't speak the same language. And so part of what we're trying to do is to, early on in these journalism students' careers, get them talking to folks who think and speak a different language, so to speak. Talk to the other people in your shop is my advice for starters. I mean, there's plenty of information online. You can learn, there are online tutorials, you can get a business plan for dummies books, things of that sort, which are very easy and accessible. But talk to the people in your own shop.
And just quickly, I wouldn't worry about the technology. I mean, there are plenty of people in this room working on ways that make it easy for you to publish and learn and incorporate what they do.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Next one.
Hi, my name is Juana Summers, and I'm a senior at the University of Missouri in the Convergence Journalism program. And I just had a quick question. In a lot of these conversations, when we're discussing entrepreneurism and journalism, we're speaking of it kind of as an either-or dynamic. And I'm wondering, like the fact that those conversations between programmers and business school individuals and journalists, kind of that we're not speaking the same language, to what extent is it important for the longevity of our industry to be able to speak that language a little bit more fluently? Because one of the things I've learned is that we need to be able to be more fluent in that if we want to survive, is something that I've been told a lot. And I was interested in hearing your perspective on that.
Oh, you want to
Take that. I think very. It's so we have 5 people in technology in our 21 people team and 1 consultant. So, and the way we've structured the company is that we have 2 long desks like a traditional newsroom. One is for writers and editors, and one is for business people and programmers. So if an editor or a writer has an idea, they talk to the programmer and we try and implement it. So over for instance, next 6 to 8 months, we're rolling out a whole new kind of a platform which is developed almost with the input from writers. And how do we increase people's attention to certain kind of stories? All this has happened because people collaborate. And I think, yes, there is a Chinese wall. Every company, every media company needs to have a Chinese wall, but it doesn't mean the idea exchange has to be blocked off. And I think that's the crucial change which needs to happen. So if you have some techie friends in the place you work in, you got to start to mingle with them, because they actually have a lot of ideas. Now, I initially started out in the first generation of the internet. We started out Forbes.com way back when there was like no standards, no media infrastructure, everything was different. And so there was 5 of us who were in the editorial, and there were 5 people in the tech group, and we all sat in the same room facing each other. So as a result of that, we each picked up each other's skills. The writers picked up the technology skills, and the technology guys picked up how we came up with stories. And out of that came collaborations on developing database-driven articles, right, which is a very interesting way of looking at things. So, Forbes does this really well, and they have the sports franchise list and all those kind of things. But all of that happens when people collaborate. So, yes, you need to learn all these things. You don't need to speak PHP or Ruby on Rails, but you need to be able to translate what is on your mind to a programmer and listen to them how they can implement your ideas. It has to be a two-way street. I think there is no difference between a writer and a programmer. They're both really poets. One creates code, one creates words. That's the only difference. That's all that there is. So you have to think in those terms. So how you talk to them is up to you. On the business side, that's entirely your personal call. Being the founder, I have no choice but to talk to, the language of business. You can choose not to, but technology you really need to learn. I mean, at least from my perspective, anyone who has interest in future of media should know technology and how it's used, not how you create things, but how you use it.
And, a quick point. I've spent a lot of time trying to think about why journalists work so hard for so little money. Seriously, there's a lot of very smart people in journalism who work their tails off for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and I've come to the conclusion. I used to think it was because they thought they were doing social good, afflict the comfortable, comfort the afflicted. But I've come to the conclusion that there's some of that, but it also has to do with the fact that it's fun, and that it's important, and that it's interesting, it's engaging and dramatic, and it has plots and drama. And I think that in order to run a good business, you have to understand why it's fun to do journalism like that, and that we always hoped for that magic businessman to come along. But it turned out that I did really well with it.
For a day, and there were no presentations and no speakers. We divided up into 3 teams, pitched some ideas, and built 3 projects in about 6 hours at the University of Washington. And it was a ton of fun to watch the journalists and programmers interact and interface. And so we're having another event in November, and we're interested in talking to people who want to host this kind of event in other cities. So if you're interested in that, come see me afterwards. Next question.
Yeah, my name is Jim Briner. I'm director of the Digital Journalism Training Program at the University of Guadalajara in Mexico. I teach a course on entrepreneurial journalism. I'm wondering if you could tell us what are some of the most interesting new ideas you've heard about for, maybe not that you're executing yourselves personally, for new revenue sources beyond sponsorships or events, or anything interesting that you've seen that either you'd love to do yourself or that you're about to do?
Well, I can tell you, if anyone was here for 6 and 60 yesterday, the company that ended up winning Sacramento Press had an interest. Is anyone here from Sacramento Press? Did they come back? Okay. They had 6 or 8 different revenue pieces to their plan. And so they were doing everything from social media consulting to their customers, and they're doing events like Ohm was mentioning. They do a lot of workshops, so they're trying to be pretty diversified in their approach with business models.
The most interesting thing to me right now is to provide a membership program that actually has value to the members. For decades, NPR and local public radio affiliates and others have done membership campaigns that, and we do them too, that are basically no more than a bumper sticker type recognition for it. And yet now we're seeing the emergence of The Guardian in England and the New York Times and others working on more sophisticated membership models that could actually provide people with an actual value for supporting an organization beyond the gratitude that knowing that they're exchanging this money for this public service. And so we're thinking of developing a sophisticated curriculum that might help people. That you become a member and we'll explain San Diego to you. We will help you understand how the city works through various events and through maybe even a graphic novel. The basic idea that if you support us, that the reason that you care about Voice of San Diego is because you care about knowing how your city works, how the public affairs work, how the environment is affected, how the education system is doing. And that, a lot of times journalists are approached and they say, well, give me the inside scoop. And I think that what people really want when they say that is actually a cogent explanation of what's happening. And if you sit with somebody at dinner and you give them an explanation of how a certain public policy issue happened in about 15 minutes, something that comes right off your head because you've been studying it for that long, that's the kind of thing that a member of a nonprofit organization might really value and might really pass along and say, wow, you want to know how the city government works? Well, you should become a member of Voice of San Diego.
Okay. Ann or Ohm, anyone?
I'll give a plug to one of our students, Tristan Harris, who's running a company called Apture. They're trying to monetize search and keep It's a site that embeds rich media into print stories, and they are trying to move the center of gravity back to the original point of content rather than having you go back off your page to Google and lose the revenue as you move off that page. They're trying to keep you glued on a center page and then monetize that search right there, which looks to me like looks pretty interesting. So you might want to look at them.
And there's TechDirt, Mike Masnick's company's got nice sponsorship by the Readers program where you kind of contribute depending on how much access you want to Mike and his network of experts. And it ranges from, I guess, a few $50 or something and to all the way up to like a couple of $1,000. And they recommend books, and there is a book club, and there is a whole bunch of other things. You should just take a look at his site. It's actually a very impressive program. Some days I wonder why I didn't think of it before. So it must be really good.
Okay. Next question, and then we'll do just 3 more questions, and then we got to wrap up. So.
My name's Emily Ingram, and I'm a student at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Stanford's partnership with the business and computer science students sounds really interesting, and I think at universities there's becoming less institutional inertia and people opposed to these or scared of them. But if you still have some of that existing at your university, what advice would you have for people to cut through that and get the ball rolling on partnerships with other colleges or other departments?
Just do it. Universities are notoriously siloed, and so trying to develop collaborations is usually left up to either a professor, department chair, students who want to do it. Find somebody who you think you can work with, a professor who is eager to do that kind of stuff, and see if you can get or form a student group and do it on the student level.
Yeah. Next question.
Good morning. My name is Kelsey Proud, and I'm a senior convergence journalism major, also at the University of Missouri. It's kind of a related question about the educational system. As far as educational collaborations with the IT department and business department go, do you feel that this is kind of an open-ended question for all 3 of you, but particularly about the program at Stanford, do you feel that it's the journalism school's responsibility to teach and integrate entrepreneurial thinking into their curriculum, or is it up to us as 20-something students who are trying to figure out what's going on with the media organizations and maybe create our own to go out and get those skills on our own?
Can I actually just interrupt?
Sure.
If you have to go to college to be an entrepreneur, I think you're in the wrong place. Yeah. You go to college to be the CEO of Enron. You go to college to be the CEO of Halliburton. You drop out of college to be Bill Gates. You drop out of college to be Mark Zuckerberg. Just making that distinction. But, no college, no program can teach you to be an entrepreneur. You either want to be one, or you can't be one. There is nobody can make you something, right? I think I actually rail against all journalism schools because that is the reason we have. Sorry. Hey, they're nice people in journalism schools. It just is.
Hired my students.
Absolutely, they're awesome, right? But we have to unprogram them, right? Because you have to think different. The problem is journalism schools, like management and business schools, teach you a certain way of doing things because they have courses and there is a very certain rigor to what they teach you. You start thinking in a certain sort of a way, which is what you're seeing in the media landscape right now. It has percolated down. People are just surprised that somebody like Mike Arrington is such a star in Silicon Valley. It's because he's an outsider. He's got an interesting take. He's funny, and sometimes controversial. Well, most of the time controversial. So what? But at least people read him. He has attention right? But if you go to a school and they'll teach you exactly the same thing, it would be very hard for one person to stand out from the other. Some people might be blessed with great writing skills, right? Not everybody is. Some people are exceptional writers, but those are very few and far between, right? Like that's the problem. But if you're if you are making yourself into a certain kind of a person because you want to be that person, I think you will be more vested in it and you will be more successful at it. It doesn't matter which college you go to, what school what programs they teach you. You have to do it. Like there is no game plan for all this. There is no playbook. There are no coaches. It's all you, right? We can all talk here and give you advice, but in the end, you're the one who is in the spotlight, who has to make things happen, and you're the one who has to have the desire to do, something new. And I think that's the key thing. Forget everything else. If you take my advice, go work at a paper part-time, even if it's for free. You will learn more than you will learn at a school.
Andy, you want to?
Yeah, let me just add a few things.
You might want to. Could have another panel, I think, on this. Topic,
part of the reason we started this initiative was in response to interest on the part of students, obviously, and we make it up as we go. And every year it's a different. The technology changes, and we're doing new things. So there is no playbook. I agree with Om on that.
I take my comments back about Stanford.
And
about those East Coast.
Oh yeah, and Stanford is not the only school moving into these uncharted waters. Obviously, Missouri's doing some great stuff. Arizona State, USC, NYU's got some experimentation going on that's very cool. I'm going to forget somebody. And Northwestern has got a good program with trying to mesh computers, scientists, and Berkeley. All right. Okay.
I'm getting the high sign. All right.
Thank you.
Super fast?
Yes.
Super fast.
Hi, I'm Barbara Martinez. I'm with globalpost.com, another journalism startup, which I encourage you to check out. So I'm with Global Post now. Previously, I was with Politico, which are both very well-funded kind of startups that have great, prominent people behind them, so they've gotten noticed. And one thing I worry about at this particular event is there are so many great ideas that I hear that are smaller and may not have the opportunity to bubble up to the top. Is that something you're concerned about, that some of the best ideas will be started on a very small scale and not actually in this very crowded environment of innovation that we're in right now, not actually have the opportunity to rise to the top and get noticed in order to succeed?
Barbara, one very well-funded startup from Silicon Valley, you might have heard of a company called Webvan.
Webvan.
Yeah, not pretty much around. And the great companies which were not funded initially were companies like Oracle, right? It started out without being funded, it bubbled up. So you just never know. Like this is the beauty of this environment right now. We just don't know who's going to be successful. So that's what makes it exciting.
If it works, people will find it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Join me, please, in thanking our panelists for a great testimony.